Alrighty, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll go ahead and give everybody just a couple minutes to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Just give it just one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We got a lot of information to present to you today. And just as a quick reminder, please place any questions for the panelists or Sunita in the Q&A, and any questions for me for technical assistance in the chat. And I would be more than happy to assist you. Awesome. And I think we are good to go ahead and get started. Sunita?
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Bree. Appreciate it. Welcome, joining us. Thank you for joining us today for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. It's presented to you today by the NorCal SBDC Finance Center, the restaurant program, and also the SBA. This is session 86 of our AskSBDC Wednesday program. So thank you again for joining us today. Next, please. I'm going to do some introductions. The Finance Center is putting this on for you today with the help of the restaurant program and also SBA. We specialize in getting loans for small businesses. I am Sunita Maharaj, the director. We also have Steve Roth here, a lending specialist. That is his email address in case you need it. Brianna Palmer is also here. She is our program assistant. She's going to answer any of your questions that are in the chat. If you have questions for the panelists, can you please put them in the Q&A? And also the restaurant program is here. Louise Dawson, program manager, Nicole Spur, program coordinator, and Northern Cal. And also SBA is here. Sorry, it looks like one of the decks got missed. SBA, Heather Lutzi is here with the district director of the Sacramento district office. Also, Carrie Ellenwood is here as well with the same office. Northern California SBDC is supported by SBA in the state of California GoBiz. That is how we're able to provide you no-cost advising, training, and workshops. If you need to get a hold of us, you can reach us at norcalsbdc.org for your local center, and I will have some more connection information for you in the next slide or so. Next, please. So let's see here. Contact the Finance Center. How do you contact the Finance Center? You get started with the Finance Center here at financingsimplified.com. And then if you want to reach the restaurant program, it is also here, nc.ecenterdirect.com, sign up. And then we can also put this information for you in the chat, so that way you have it there. If you want to reach your local center, you can reach them at NorCal SBDC Centers at www.norcalsbdc.org. Next, please. Disclaimer. So the disclaimer for today, actually, Bree, can I please share my screen? Because there's a couple of things that changed and I may have not sent you the correct deck, and I apologize for that. Thank you.
You should be good to go see it.
Awesome. Let's see here. We've already gone through that really quickly. I wanted to show you the Northern California footprint. So we have 36 counties that we serve, 18 full service centers, 6 satellite centers, 35 outreach locations, 2 tech programs, 6 affiliate programs, and we have a workforce of over 500 individuals that can assist you. And here again is our contact information for the NorCal SBDC. We can also put this in the chat for you so that way you have this information. Our upcoming Finance Center webinars for the SBDC Learning for Finance Center, and also you can find all of our older webinars and everything for all the centers at SBDC Learning. So we're going to have another COVID update release update next Wednesday. We're going to go through all SVOG, we'll go through this, we'll go through PPP, we'll go through EIDL, and we'll go through all of the loan programs. We're also going to have a restaurant revitalization fund webinar again just for this next Wednesday, Wednesday the 5th and the 19th of May. Own and invest commercial real estate, Tuesday, May 11th, and then expansion capital, Tuesday, May 25th. To get a hold of all of our calendar for all of our centers, including the restaurant program, you can go to sbdc.events/network/calendar, and that's where you can find it as well. Or you can just go to norcalsbdc.org and go to events. And then if you want to see any of our older videos, you can go to learn.norcalsbdc.org. Disclaimer, things are changing all the time. This information provided is up to date as of last night. I did see some things that changed again today. There are some new documents that came out. I believe what we have in our Google folder is the correct documents, which is the application, and then also regarding the program. There's also a new document that's just online. It's sort of like the FAQ for this, but it's online, and that's how you would use it. We can kind of show you that a little bit later as well. The information provided in this webinar and materials provided are to you are intended for educational and informational purposes. So let's see here. I am going to stop sharing, and then I am going to hand this over to Heather Lutzy, and she is going to share her deck with us today and go through the information. We will be answering questions throughout in the Q&A. So if you have questions, please place them there. If we're unable to answer all your questions today, we will get back to you when we can. Some things may not be able to get answered because it is such a new program and they're still putting out new information every minute. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand this over to Bree to put on the new deck and over to Heather Lutzy with the SBA. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, Sunita. I appreciate it. Again, as Sunita said, my name is Heather Lutzy. I'm the district director for the Sacramento district office. My district office encompasses the 22 northeastern counties of the state. I am here with my deputy director, Carrie Ellenwood, and she is going to assist Sunita in answering as many questions as we can. I also want to provide a disclaimer telling you that Sunita is absolutely correct. Things are changing all the time. So please think of this as we are learning together. If there's any questions that we're unable to answer, we will try to circle back with you. And for now, this slide deck was just given to us yesterday. So this is the most recent information that we have as the agency on the program. So next slide, please. So what is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, or RRF? The American Rescue Plan, ARPA, became into law on March 11th, and it established the program. There are a lot of misnomers out there about this program. We keep hearing that it is a grant, and we need to be very clear that this is not a traditional grant. It is a fund. So we'll go through that a little bit, but I just want to make that disclaimer. The ARPA appropriated $28.6 billion for this fund. We do expect this to be gone fairly quickly. The appropriations will remain available until they're expended. We're at the mercy of Congress. Hopefully they will allocate more funds to this should the appropriations be expended, but there's no guarantee of that. The other thing is that all these funds have to be used towards eligible purposes no later than March 11th of 2023. Next slide. So this is basically who's eligible. The entities that are listed below would be eligible for the RRF program. If your business type is not listed here, we could certainly kind of take that offline. There are so many variables with respect to eligibility that, don't count yourself out yet if you're not listed here. But definitely keep in mind that if you are, say, a bakery, on-site sales to the public have to comprise of at least 33% of your gross receipts. The same goes for the brew pubs, wineries, inns, which would be kind of the hotel type of bed and breakfast type of thing. Again, a lot is changing on this, and please don't count yourself out if you're not listed here. Circle back with us just to see if there is the potential of you receiving this funding. Next slide. So the SBA can provide up to $5 million per location, and that's not to exceed 10 million per applicant and affiliated businesses. So the affiliated businesses, even if they're not in the same NAICS code or line of work, if they're, you know, a completely different line of work, we still aggregate those. So that 10 million is going to be the maximum. The minimum loan amount is $1,000 as shown. Next slide, please. So this is another area where I think there was a lot of miscommunication initially on the program, and the applicants do not need to register through sam.gov, and SBA will not be requiring a DUNS number or a cage identifier number. I think the talk initially was that everybody had to rush to get these, and unfortunately, they are not required. So again, another miscommunication, but just be cognizant of that. No need to register. For some of the other programs that SBA offers, there is the need to register. So just to touch on that. Valid unexpired ITINs are acceptable. So again, unexpired, and you can look at the link here to go through the unexpired ones. And if there is an expired ITIN, the applicant has to request a new ITIN. Our system will not allow the loan to be issued a funding ID number if that ITIN is expired. Next slide. So again, entities that are ineligible would be state or local government operated businesses. Any business that has 20 or more locations, again, regardless of if those businesses are under the same or different names or in different industries. The further ineligibility would be anybody that has a pending application in the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, if they're a publicly traded company, if they've permanently closed their location, is a nonprofit organization, and is not eligible for the funding of at least $1,000. And there's some calculations on that we'll go through in a moment. Next slide, please. So again, who is eligible? The forms of organization can be really any number of organizations, your C Corps, your S Corps, your partnerships, LLCs, sole props, self-employed individuals, independent contractors, tribal businesses, and LLCs that are taxed as S Corps or sole proprietors. B Corps are eligible, but they will need to select the C or S Corp on the application. And I think Steve's going to go through the application in a little while. So bear with us on that one. Next slide, please. So franchises. Franchises would be eligible, and we look at that franchise as an individual, not as an aggregate. So, you know, if you have a Dairy Queen, we're not going to be looking at the entirety of that Dairy Queen. We're going to look at the individual location. Any business concern that's operating as a franchise, they still have to meet SBA's eligibility requirements and be listed on our franchise directory. We can also put that link into the chat for those of you that have franchises and are interested in the program. For brands that are not listed in the directory, or brands that have been previously declined because of affiliation issues, the franchise must submit a franchise disclosure document or another agreement that would document how the franchise is working, and perhaps we could get them to an eligible stage. Next slide, please. Who is eligible? So this is something that is very, very new. Applicants that are operating under an approved plan of reorganization, either under Chapter 11 or 12 or 13 of bankruptcy, can be eligible for the funding. They have to be operating under that plan. If the applicant has filed a Chapter 7 liquidation or Chapter 7, 11, or 12 that is not under an approved plan as of yet would be ineligible. Again, those businesses that are permanently closed, I kind of think that that doesn't even need to be said. I would assume that everybody understands that if the restaurant is permanently closed, we will not be able to assist. Temporary closure, of course, is something completely different. Okay, next slide. So how do other SBA relief programs impact the RRF? Any funds that were received through the Paycheck Protection Program will be subtracted from the applicant's final funding amount. So this is really something that we have talked about somewhat, and not knowing all of the particulars, but for round 1, for round 2, those funds will be deducted from the Restaurant Revitalization Fund loan amount, or fund amount, I should say. With that, if upon applying for the RRF and an applicant has an active PPP application, those have to be withdrawn prior to obtaining any of this funding. The applicant cannot have a pending application for a shuttered venue operators grant either. So just stuff to keep in mind there. Next slide. So with this, a lot of the parameters or mandates from the applicant side are really based on attestations. So the applicant will be certifying or attesting to the accuracy of the information that they are entering into the system. Keeping in mind, this is a direct application. Again, Steve will be going over the application, but keep in mind that those attestations or certifications are mandatory. Next slide. So who's eligible and what are the uses of funds? So business expenses, any payroll expenses, including sick leave, business utility payments, very similar to what was provided during the PPP. What I think is beneficial in this program is the construction of outdoor seating. Keeping in mind that the expansion costs are ineligible, but there was a lot of outdoor seating and modifications done to facilities during the last 14 months, and all of those would be eligible for the funds. Business debt, this is not necessarily a refinance of that business debt, but payments on any business debt, mortgage obligation, both principal and interest can be included. Does not include any prepayment of those, but you could pay to current. Business debt service, both principal and interest on any other types of debt, again, does not include prepayment of any of that debt. So even though you're able to make those payments, principal and interest, you cannot get rid of that debt. I'm not sure what's happening. I'm getting a feedback all of a sudden. In any case, next slide, please. Okay, the funds have to be spent on expenses that were incurred between February 15th of 2020 and March 11th of 2023. If some of you are familiar with the way that construction loans are done, whether it be in the conventional world or the SBA world, the program actually will do different draws of funds throughout this. If the entity has to expend those funds before additional funds are allocated, but they'll know what that is because the maximum loan amount will be issued initially. So hopefully that makes sense. There'll be a couple of different draws. The business, if it's permanently closed after receiving the funds for the covered period, that there's not an adverse effect. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully that won't happen, and hopefully these funds will assist businesses in their ongoing operations. Any funds that are not spent on eligible expenses by the time the covered period ends have to be returned. So if those are not spent by March 11th of 2023, that whatever that additional amount is has to be returned to SBA. Again, next slide. The use of funds assessment. After the total awarded funds have been exhausted, entities then must provide a detailed expenditure report and certification for the required period. So that certification goes back to the attestations that are going to be on the application, as well as documented throughout the term of the fund. Until the applicant completes the use of fund assessment beginning in December of 2021, applicants are required to provide self-reported, unaudited data detailing the distributed funds through the year 2023. So there shouldn't be any additional expenses associated with the data being required, because there's no need to do it audited. So again, I know that the SBDC often advises businesses to open a separate account or have the funds put into a different account so that they can monitor them much better. We'll let them talk about that in a few minutes. The SBA will be providing additional guidance that outlines the detailed reporting requirements in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. All of this information can also be found on our website. The slide deck is not up and posted yet, but we're happy to send this out to the audience today. Next slide, please. So how do I calculate the potential fund amount? So calculation number one, and we're going to go through just 3 separate scenarios here. The applicants in operation prior to or on January 1st, 2019 would take their 2019 gross receipts minus the 2020 gross receipts minus the PPP loan amounts. And that's where we come up with the potential amount of the fund. The next slide, please. So again, calculation 2, applicants that began operations partially through 2019. We would take the average 2019 monthly gross receipts times 12 minus the 2020 gross receipts minus those PPP loan amounts. For this, the applicants that began operation partially, they can choose the calculation 2 or 3. However, the calculation 3 could require longer processing times. So just keep that in mind. Again, just to tell you with respect to the processing times, this is a direct fund from SBA. SBA will do the artificial intelligence initially for the vetting of the applicant, and then it will go to a loan officer review, and then it will go to a supervisor review. So as far as timeframes, I don't feel comfortable in quoting those at this time, but just want you to know that it's a direct program. Lending institutions are not involved with this. It's just SBA. Let's go to calculation 3. So calculation 3 is for applicants that began operations on or between January 1st, 2020 and March 10th of 2021. So these new businesses that started during the pandemic, you know, God bless you, that's wonderful. It's incredible that so many businesses were able to start during that time. What we would do is look at the total amount spent on eligible expenses between February 15th and March 11th. So that would be February 15th of 2020 and March 11th of 2021. Again, minus the 2020 and 2020 gross receipts minus PPP loan amounts. Hopefully that makes sense. And we're trying to give as many scenarios as we can here. If you have something that's kind of a little different, please reach out and we'll do our best to answer those questions. Next slide, please. Okay, what can I exclude from the 2020 gross receipts? So there's a lot of information here on the slides. So do not include any of the following in your gross receipts: the PPP loan, first draw or second draws, the SBA Section 1112 payments. That was where SBA was making the payments on behalf of the borrower, both principal and interest, due to the CARES Act. That does not have to be included into your gross receipts. Any economic injury disaster loan or EIDL advance loan, the targeted EIDL advance loan, or any other grant funds that were received through the CARES Act. They don't have to be included into your gross receipts calculation. Any of the state or local business grants that you obtained, totally fine. Don't include those as well. The Randolph-Shepard Act financial relief and restoration payments, which was the FRRP appropriation. So those do not have to be included as well. And you know, us with the government, we love all these acronyms. So I apologize in advance for those. Next slide. Okay, so how do I apply? Again, this program is directly through SBA. We've built a special platform for the applications, and it's through a point of sale vendor. SBA is actively looking to partner with more point of sale providers, and you can also apply telephonically. Now, keep in mind that if you do apply through the telephone, the process will take longer. Next slide. What documents do I need in order to apply? So of course, there's an application that Steve will go over. The verification of tax information, which is the IRS form 4506T, has to be completed and signed by the applicant, and completion of this form digitally for the SBA grant platform will satisfy this requirement. I know there's been a lot of discussion with respect to the IRS and them falling behind on processing those 4506Ts. So hopefully this will mitigate that delay. Gross receipts documentation. So any of the following documents that would demonstrate your gross receipts and, if applicable, the eligible expenses. Again, business forms, you know, your 1120s, 1120Ss, your 1040s, Schedule C, 1040, Schedule F, etc. For a partnership, we would be looking at the 1065s, including the K1s, bank statements, externally and internally prepared financial statements. I shouldn't say and, it's or. There should be no additional funds needed to apply for this program, so you don't have to have those externally prepared. In any case, such statements as profit and loss statements, balance sheets, etc., and point of sale information as well, if you operate using, you know, your 1099Ks. In any case, whatever you can do to document that gross receipts would be great. If you have any questions on the documentation, you can always reach out. Next slide, please. Okay, so what other documents do I need to apply? Again, this is continued. The application, which is the 3172, the 4506T, the 2019 gross receipts, tax returns, 3 months of bank statements, the 2020 gross receipts, and our preferred method is federal tax returns. If you don't have those filed yet, that's understandable, but we would then need alternative documentation to show those gross receipts for 2020. The externally or internally prepared financial statements, again, income statements, profit and loss, they do have to be signed and certified by the applicant. So there should be an applicant's signature on each of those documents stating to the validity or accuracy of the statements and dated. Next slide, please. So again, this just goes through a lot of the documentation that I don't think it's necessary to read through all of this, but just know that these are the required documents. And I think it's pretty expansive and flexible with respect to other documentation that could be collected rather than, specifics. Next slide, please. Okay. In addition to the documents on the prior slide, for applicants that have a brew pub, tasting room, tap room, brewery, winery, distillery, or bakery, we have to show that those 33% of the gross receipts were for on-site public sales. So that could, you could utilize information that you filed with the state and Trade Bureau forms, state and local taxes filed, internally created reports, inventory management, sales reporting, etc. For applicants that have an inn, again, very, very similar, but we would look at the on-site sales of food and beverage to the public and not necessarily the overnight stays or the cost of the actual housing. Next slide. So we did create a toll-free number for a call center, and we do expect these to be answered by live bodies. We've actually, all of the field offices throughout the country and a lot of our other program offices have volunteered our staff to be able to man these systems. They're, again, you can contact that number, but you can also contact your local district office, which would, again, be Carrie and I and the staff that is left here in the Sacramento office. We do have help in multiple languages for this program, so keep that in mind. If you need assistance in a specific language, please let us know and we can coordinate that. Next slide. So best practices. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I know that SBDC has always kind of touted the benefits of having a separate bank account for the funds that you're expending in each of these programs, just for ease of the forgiveness process. Same thing is going to be true in the RRF program. If you can house all of your documentation in one place that it's easily acceptable, you're definitely going to be better off. Actually providing complete documentation with your application will help. The applications that don't have the information will be rejected, and that's just going to start the clock longer. Keep in mind that there is a finite amount of funds on this, and again, we don't know if there's going to be additional funding reallocated to this program, but keep in mind it's in your best interest to provide complete applications with complete documentation. Leverage your resources. While it's not required to use CPAs or other accounting professionals, they may help in documenting your application. I would also state that the SBDC is going to be a great resource for you to be able to go through a checklist, or so to speak, with respect to what's going to be required on these. The application corrections. This is something that is very, very important. SBA is not able to make corrections on behalf of applicants. If there is a correction that's needed, they will have to call that hotline. Our district offices will not be able to assist in that regard. The hotline will be able to assist in most cases. Applicants who still intend to apply for the PPP program or advised to complete their PPP application in advance of the RRF application. Again, those funds will be deducted from the RRF, but you cannot have an outstanding application for a PPP during this process. Again, next slide. We have created a pilot period, and this is, I know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that with our Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, we launched the program and immediately the system crashed. We're trying to avoid things like that and trying to be very conscientious about what we're putting out there. So the agency has reached out to 1,000 businesses nationwide that are going through our beta test process. So that pilot period with entities that had expressed interest is where we plan on kind of vetting out all of the hiccups that could potentially occur. So that's what we're in the process of doing now, keeping in mind that these particular entities, these 1,000 entities are not going to receive funds until that program is open. They're doing this, just to be of assistance to the agency. So I know that there was a lot of concern about these companies that were participating and that they were going to get preferential treatment, and that's truly not the case. There is also established with the Act for RRF as a 21-day priority period. Those 21 days will be specific for women-owned businesses, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged applicants. They're the only ones that will be funded during that time frame. On day 22, all of the applications will be opened and will be processed until those funds are exhausted. I know we've talked about this quite a bit over, the last 13 or 14 months, is the importance of the demographic information on these applications. And unfortunately, I know that there's a lot of reluctance from folks to complete that demographic information. It's not mandatory, but I have to tell you, it is extremely helpful to us to make certain that we're reaching these businesses that are, in these socially and economically disadvantaged areas. So please encourage the applicants whom you're talking to complete that data. It's really the only way that we have to gauge it. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some other things too. With respect to that priority period, businesses that are owned 51% and managed on a daily basis and or controlled by either the women, veterans, or socially and economically disadvantaged. Again, applicants will self-certify to their application that they meet these eligibility requirements. For example, if there are 5 owners, each of 20%, 2 owners are veterans, and 1 is socially and economically disadvantaged, SBA will consider that application to have met those requirements, and they'll be in that priority group. Next slide. So the socially disadvantaged, measure, for lack of a better word, are those who have been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice, cultural bias because of their identity as a member of a group without regard to their individual qualities. Individuals who are members of the following groups are presumed to be socially disadvantaged: Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, including Alaska Natives and Native Hawaiians, Asian Pacific Americans, and subcontinent Asian Americans. The economically disadvantaged would be those individuals whose ability to compete in the free enterprise system have been impaired or diminished the capital and credit opportunities as compared to others in the same business area who are not socially disadvantaged. So if you guys have questions on those definitions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, next slide. The entity reorganization for purposes of qualification priority period will result in automatic disqualification. So what this is essentially saying is if there is a change in ownership or management to meet that priority period, it's not acceptable. It's going to be an automatic disqualification, and there is no second chance on that one. So they either are in that priority group or they are not. They cannot change their structure to become part of that priority group. Next slide, please. So there's specific set-asides in this funding, again, as part of the legislation. $5 billion is set aside for applicants with the 2019 gross receipts of not more than 500,000. There's an additional $4 billion in set-asides for applicants with 2019 gross receipts between $500,000 and $1 and $1.5 million. And then the additional $500 million is set aside for applicants whose 2019 gross receipts were not more than 50,000. So I think that there's a lot of promise here to assist those smaller businesses. And again, I'm hopeful that we will touch those small businesses. And you know, if the funds happen to run out, I'm very hopeful that our congressional leaders will recognize that and recognize the need for additional funding. SBA reserves the right to reallocate these funds at the discretion of the administrator. So this is how it was set up, and we do have the authority to move things around. But that 500 million set aside for those smaller businesses, you know, that is going to hopefully assist our little mom and pop areas. Next slide, please. That's it. Okay. So I know that, you know, again, we're all learning from this, and I hope that you found this presentation helpful. We will get better at going through this as time goes on, but we wouldn't be where we are without the help of our SBDC friends and, you know, Louise, Steve, Sunita, Brianna, Nicole, everybody. So we sincerely appreciate your support and collaboration in this process. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sunita.
Thank you very much, Heather. Really appreciate it. A lot of information. I know we've been looking at this for the last couple of days, and it's a lot to get through. So what we're going to do is, Bree, I'm not sure if you have the application. If not, I can share it for Steve. You do? Okay, perfect. We're going to open up the application, and then Steve is going to go through it just to show you what this is a sample that SBA has on their website at this time. So you kind of know what's expected of you when you're completing this application. So I will hand it over to Steve. Thank you.
Oh, great. Give it a try. So the first page of the application, which, Brianna, can you adjust the page so it fits on the screen? I'm getting the top half as opposed to the full page. I'm always a problem. It's not on at all now. There we go. So, you know, the first page is very consistent with what Heather talked about. It goes over the basics, you know, the program up to $5 million for one location, $10 million for multiple locations, a minimum award of $1,000. And the critical thing is that the funds have to be used by March 11th, 2023, which will be something on the order of 21 months after most people get funded. Next one. Thank you. So the second page is pretty straightforward. You know, it's the business's legal name. If it has a DBA, a doing business as, the DBA name, the street address, the business identification number, or your social security number if you're a sole proprietor or self-employed. And one thing to think about is don't change your name for the purpose of this application, right? If I'm Stephen J. Roth, I don't want to suddenly be S.J. Roth, or I don't want to be Stephen Roth. If every other document I've done, idle PPP, for these programs has been Stephen J. Roth, that's the way it ought to be. Everything should match as closely as humanly possible so that you're not bounced out for a small clerical error. And so check your street address, right? 1001 is not the same as 1010. You'll do the same for all of the business owners, up to 4 of them. Want to scroll down, Brianna? And so you have room for up to 4 business owners. You'll put in their names and their identification numbers. And this has to be filled out for everyone who owns 20% or more of the equity of the company. So obviously you probably won't have more than 5. And that's what they've allowed. The primary person, the primary contact, and then 4 other equity owners. So if someone owns 19.9%, they don't have to be part of the document. If someone owns 20%, they have to be part of the document. Scroll down, please. Okay. And then as Heather pointed out, you'll complete what type of organization you are. It's however you file your taxes. And then a couple of key things, right? Is the applicant's business, is it a state or local government? If the answer is yes, then you're not eligible and there's no point in completing the form. As of March 13th, 2020, do you own or operate more than 20 locations? If the answer is yes, you're not eligible. The program cuts off at a maximum of 20 locations. So that means if I have a restaurant chain and I have 21 locations, I'm not qualified. Has a pending application for or has received a shuttered venue operating grant? If the answer is yes, then you're not eligible to apply. And so really, it just says that you should look at both programs. Depending upon what kind of program you are, what kind of business you are, one program or the other may offer a significantly greater opportunity. And for administrative purposes, the goal is to apply to one versus all of them. And if you're a publicly traded company, in theory, you have access to capital outside of the SBA, and so you're not eligible for the program. Number 2, very simple, what's your business? So you may have a restaurant and a food truck. You may be a caterer with a food truck. You may be a restaurant that also caters. Try and match the boxes you check to your business as close as it fits. And again, as Heather pointed out, for bakeries, breweries, wineries, and distilleries, you have to be able to show that 1/3 of your gross receipts came in the form of sales to the public. So if you're a bakery where people just pick things up and take them away, you're not a restaurant. If you're a bakery that has seats and sells 1/3 or more of its product to people inside, then again, you do that. And that's going to be true because they're taxed differently. If you buy food at, I'll just pick Whole Foods for the sake of argument. If you go into a Whole Foods and buy food to eat there, they have to charge sales tax. If you buy food to take home, they don't. And so the sales tax forms that you have to fill out as a business will trigger the 1/3. That's probably as clear as mud, but it comes right out of your point of sale system. Scroll down. Again, Heather pointed all these out, but I'll just go over them. If the business is permanently closed, you're not eligible. You can't get a loan for a business that doesn't exist. For those who filed a plan, for those who've gone formally bankrupt, meaning they've gone to federal court and have a formal federal bankruptcy in process, if you have a plan of reorganization, meaning your exit from bankruptcy has been approved by the bankruptcy court judge, and that's what a plan of reorganization is, then the new entity that emerges from bankruptcy is eligible to apply. If you're in bankruptcy but have no approved plan of reorganization, and again, these plans can only be approved by a federal bankruptcy court judge, then you're not eligible. If you simply filed for Chapter 7, Chapter 7 is a liquidation under the Federal Bankruptcy Act. 11 12, and 13 are variations of a reorganization. So if you just filed for a Chapter 7, you're not eligible for the loan, the grant. And then, did you receive a first draw PPP loan? If you did, the answer is yes. Pretty much everyone will have. Just write in the amount you received and your SBA PPP loan number, which will be on your loan documents you got from your lender. It'll also be on your forgiveness documents. And there is a provision, one of the safe harbor provisions, that anyone who got the PPP loan and repaid it for some strange reason prior to May 18th, 2020, was allowed to reapply. So if you did get the loan in April and paid it off in May, you're not going to be penalized for that. If you have a second draw PPP loan, you'll do basically the same thing. The answer is yes. How much you received and your loan number. And then, do you have affiliates? Scroll down a little bit, Bree. Thank you. Great. So the answer, if the answer is, if you don't have affiliates, if you're you have one location, one one physical location for a restaurant, you'd say no. If you have multiple restaurant locations, you'd say yes. How many affiliates do you have? If the Roth restaurant chain has 4 locations, the answer would be 4. And then you put in, each of the affiliates' legal business names if they're doing business as something else. And as Heather pointed out, there are certain franchisors that are approved under, and they're in the SBA's franchise directory. So you want to check and see whether your franchise is in the directory, and then scroll down a little bit. Right, and then is the applicant or any owner currently suspended, disbarred, proposed for disbarment, etc. So, if you've done something terribly wrong, you should basically say so. And then they'll want to know what date you began operations. And that would really be when you began operations as a company, not by location. So if you started 10 years ago and you've been opening stores, opening restaurants, you'd put in when you opened. Next one. Right. So this is where it gets somewhat interesting. So the table 1, this is a calculation for businesses that were open prior to January 1, 2019. So these are what you'd think of as totally pre-COVID locations. The business opened sometime in 2018 or prior. It doesn't matter if it opened in 2010, 2011, just as long as you were open for the full calendar year of 2019, you put in your gross revenues into the first box. Your second box is your 2020 gross revenues, less those things that Heather pointed out before. Your PPP loans don't have to be added in. If you had an SBA loan and you received a benefit under SBA section 1112, which was a deferral of principal and interest for a period of time, those benefits don't have to be put in. The same is true with your EIDL loan, your targeted EIDL loan, your EIDL advance, etc. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, my restaurant had 1 location. I did $1 million in 2019. In 2020, we took a big hit. Our revenues dropped 50%. We're down to $500,000. But I also got a $100,000 PPP loan. The PPP loan goes into line 3. Lines 2 and 3 together, 500,000 of sales in 2020 plus 100,000 of a PPP loan gives me line 5, which will be 600,000. I have 1 location. I multiply 1 times 5 million and I get 5 million. But the important thing is in line 8, right? Because I'm allowed $400,000. I did $1 million. It dropped to 500,000. I had a $100,000 benefit. So my grant through the program would be 400,000. And I use 400,000 because it's the lesser of the numbers. Scroll down. And then it gets somewhat complicated in item number 9, but basically if I have one location, I have one, the calculation's pretty straightforward. The second table, go down one more. Second table is if I opened in 2019, but I was not open for all of 2019. And so I'll just follow the form as it exists. So I put in my 2019 gross receipts, and let's just say, so I can do the arithmetic in my head, I was open for the 2.5 months as specified on the form, the example, and I did $250,000 in those 2.5 months. And then obviously COVID hit. So my annualized revenue would be the 250,000 in sales from 19 divided by 2.5, which is $100,000 a month, multiplied by 12, which is $1.2 million. And that would be my line 1D revenue, my sort of annualized revenue assumption for 2019. Then the form follows exactly the same as in the first example. You know, I would take away what I did in 2020. I would take away any PPP benefit I received, and I'd follow the rest of the calculations exactly the same as I did for the first line, for the first form. Next one. Pardon me. Calculation 3, right? Funding for applicants that began operations on or between January 1st, 2020 and March 10th, 2021. So, you know, if I opened in the very beginning of the year in 2020, I would have had, you know, 10, 12 weeks before COVID hit. Pretty much everything shut down around the 10th or so. 10th to the 21st of March, 2020. So I would have had a few months, but I could have opened later. I could have opened in July when we had a lull. I could have opened and just been a takeout operation. So on this form for businesses that opened between January 1st, 2020 and March 10th, 2021, you'll put in your eligible costs as defined on the next page. You'll enter your gross receipts, you know, as of March 11th, 2021. And again, you do not include PPP, EIDL advance, and all the other programs. And after that, the calculations flow basically the same way. Now, one thing to think about is if you have one location, one restaurant, you're only going to use one of the 3 forms. So if my restaurant was open prior to January 1st, 2019, I'll just use table 1. If my restaurant opened during 2019, I would just use table 2. If my restaurant opened after January 1st, 2020, I would just use table 3. However, if you have multiple locations up to the allowable maximum of 20, your request, your loan request could actually be a combination of all 3 forms. So I might have had 3 restaurants that were open for the entire year of 2019. Their economic impact would go on the first table. I might have had another one that opened in July of 2019. The full year calculation for that 4th restaurant would go on the second table. And I might have had a 5th restaurant that was in process, got approved, and I opened it during COVID anyway, and they would be on table 3. And down at the bottom of table 3's form, if you'd scroll, Bree, you'll see table 4. Table 4 is to be completed by all applicants. And that's the aggregate of the amounts of the line 9s from tables 1, 2, and 3. So if I had one restaurant that it was open before January of 2019, then I just have basically line 9 of table 1 plus 0 plus 0. If my restaurant opened after January 1st, 2019, I would have 0 from the first form, something from the second form, and 0 from the third table. But I might have all 3 numbers collectively, and then you'd put the total request down at the bottom. So even though it's not on its own page, it's very important. It has to be completed by all applicants. Again, there are 3 scenarios. The restaurant was open for the entire year of 2019. A restaurant could be open for part of the year in 2019, in which case the calculation helps you to annualize the sales. And you opened in 2020. So if you look down, the purpose of the business revitalization funds, you can select all that apply, and again, Heather went over them before and they're on the application, but you can look down, it's payroll costs, business rent, business mortgage, your debt service, your utilities, et cetera. And those are also the expenses that you would use in the calculation if you didn't actually open or opened only for a short period of time in 2020. So those are the costs that you'd be looking to aggregate for the form. And, as Heather said, there's a priority associated with women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, disadvantaged persons-owned businesses. And the key thing is that any combination of the owners that are more than 51% in this category count as in this category. So I could have 4 partners. 3 of my partners could be women, in which case we'd be a 60% women-owned business. As Heather said, this is all self-certified. You don't have to submit your women-owned business, minority-owned business forms. However, I wouldn't lie about this. It would be a bad thing. It's a self-certification process, and you have to basically certify by initialing. So you want to look at your partnership and see where you are. Not every ethnic group is part of the minority structure. So look at the definitions. They're on Heather's slides. They're also on the form. And then for all applicants, you'll go through the next part of it, the documentation. You'll submit a lot of forms and a lot of paperwork, and just make sure you do them all correctly. We had one question that came in earlier today, which is, I file my taxes on a fiscal year, but this program is really organized around calendar years. My advice would be to file your tax returns as they exist in the system, because the 4506T form is designed to match what you're saying about your tax returns with what's in the IRS database. And so you don't want to start submitting new tax returns, but you probably want to have some kind of an Excel worksheet that you self-verify, which shows the bridge between your fiscal year calculations and your calendar year calculations for the purpose of the grant. But we're going to find out more about that over the next couple of days before the portal opens. Scroll down. Right. And then again, you're going to check a lot of boxes. You're not permanently closed. We don't have to go through each one of these. If you have questions, you can always email us. But the important thing is to know where you fit in the time frame. 3 time frames. You're open for all of 2019. You're open for part of 2019. You opened in 2020 or later. And there are 3 different formulas to determine the sort of economic impact you had from doing this. And with that, I think, and then the form also contains all the definitions that Heather went over, so you can read them in detail in terms of, what's actually a disadvantaged group and how you look at it. But overall, the form is very straightforward. And for those of us who've done PPP and EIDL, it should be a walk in the park. And obviously, we're here to help. With that, I'll turn it back over to Sunita.
Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it. We do have some questions in the queue that we did not answer individually. We want to answer out loud so that way everyone can get the benefit of the question and answer. And so, Louise, I know that you said you wanted to answer one of them, so I'll just go ahead and let you go with that one first.
Sure. It's Miriam's question. She was unclear about communicating to clients. Should a business that is not socially and economically disadvantaged still apply when the application goes live? They won't be reviewed until day 22, but they can still apply. That was my understanding, unless Heather or Carrie have something new to add to that. I heard that they were accepting all applications, but only processing those particular ones. So that would be correct, Miriam.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Thanks, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to go on to Genevieve. She is asking, the question is, how do wineries determine on-site sales when the tasting rooms were closed for long periods in the last year? So there's actually a definition, and thank you so much, Carrie, for putting that in the chat also. There's a definition of on-site sales: sales of food and or beverages that were consumed on the applicant's premises, were purchased at the applicant's premises to go, were purchased online and picked up by the applicant's premises, or were delivered directly to the consumer for use. These sales must be only to consumers and not wholesale sales, may be counted towards the 33% revenue number. And I can put that direct information in the chat as well, Genevieve, if you want it. But if you go into any of the documents within the SBA for this program, you can also find it there. And those documents are located in the Google folder that Bree has put into the chat too. I hope that helps. And then Jermaine is asking, when multiple locations, but all locations are different corporations, I don't think that that should make a difference, correct, Steve? I think once you apply, you would apply either section 1, 2, or 3, but the entity wouldn't be a consideration. Is that correct, or am I off base on that?
No, if there's common ownership, you're an affiliate. So I might have 10 restaurants. Each one can be set up as its own LLC, but I own them all. So they're all affiliated restaurants. I can't get 5 million times 10.
Yeah, from what I understand from that one, you have to be a 51% or more owner in the affiliate, and then that would count. That's what I read. So it would count as an affiliate, in other words.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is, let's not go to prison over this. Be reasonable about it. Nobody wants to be audited and sued.
See, there's another question. One more question. They changed ownership in 2020 to 50-50. I think it was because she had stated previously, Tracy had stated previously, that it was 51% woman owned. And then now in 2020, they changed to 50-50. You would give the best information for the current situation.
I would use whatever it is today at the time you apply.
Yeah.
And looks like there's questions in the chat. If you can please place them in the Q&A so that way we can answer the questions. Really appreciate that. We don't know when the applications are going to open up. I know that's a question that's been asked a lot today. We don't know when this restaurant fund is going to open up, unfortunately. Hopefully soon. But if you are not a part of our newsletter, please sign up for our newsletter, because that's where we will let you know. As soon as we find out, we will send out that information via our SBDC newsletter, Northern California newsletter. So that is the fastest way to find out for you. And then also SBA has provided a sign up there as well. So anything that's new to the RRF, you can sign up there for that information. Train, can a client who is renting a pop-up restaurant location qualify if they're selling food there? I mean, we'd need more information, Trang. I'm not really sure about that. Louise or Steve, anybody else?
Gut feel would say no, but
I think pop-ups might qualify, depending on if they meet all the other criteria, because there are some pop-ups that are regular. They do regular, 2, 3, 4 times a week at a particular location. So,
well, in theory, a food truck qualifies, and a food truck could be everywhere, could be somewhere different every day.
yeah,
Many food trucks have a set schedule.
A pop-up, right?
But I think the question is, pop-up restaurants specifically are not in the regs right now. So the only thing we could do would be to ask about it.
And I think that's correct, Steve. I also would say that it's likely they would be considered like a food truck because, as you said, those go different places and they bring their things there. So I think that's a good question. We may have to pose that to the program office since they aren't specifically spelled out, and I'll make sure we get that question asked up to them.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So let's see here. Jermaine is asking, going back to the multiple locations but different entity question. So only one application question, which corporation will receive the loan and how you redistribute the loan between all locations.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it in perspective. If I'm an investor in 20 restaurants, but my ownership is variable in all of them, it doesn't make all 20 restaurants affiliates. They're affiliates if they share a common name or, you know, the primary ownership. So, you know, if I own 20 Subways, they're all clearly affiliated. But if you have 20 different EINs with 20 different sets of owners, you'd have to look at it individually.
Thank you, Steve. Glenn is asking, can a woman-owned rental venue that hosts events and weddings be eligible to apply for the RRF? And I don't believe that this is what this fund is for. It is for restaurants. And let me see here. Are you 33% at least being sold for food and beverages? We would need to dig into that a little bit more, Glenn.
Yeah, my feeling is it's neither fish nor fowl. It's neither a restaurant nor a venue, really. So it's eligible for PPP and EIDL, but it's not a venue under the Shuttered Venue Operating Grant.
Correct.
And it's not really a restaurant or its primary role in life is not to serve food. But I could do a wedding without food, so.
Right, so it's just the venue itself. So I'm looking at the who can apply, and I don't see that as being one of the approved entities at this point. And then
And for
Sheila is
the
asking, I'm going to let
funding-
you guys take over this question because I'm going to have some noise coming through, so I'm going to mute myself.
No, okay. I think that's what Heather said during the presentation. If you get a grant of $1 million, just to use a number, you have until March 11th of 2023 to use that money for the appropriate items as listed in the application. And we don't need to go over them all again. You know, they're there. If you use the $1 million, then it becomes a grant. If I only use, say, 600,000 of it, the 600,000 I've used appropriately is a grant. The 400,000 that I did not use has to be returned to the SBA. It's not a loan in the sense that, you know, the difference between what I was funded with and what I used will then be termed out. So you really have to be careful with this because it's very clear. They'll pay the fund, you'll pay the funds back out of the unused portion of the proceeds. It's like just like a construction loan, or, you know, I think it'll cost me $1 million to build something. It costs 800,000. I give the other 200,000 back.
And Steve, just for clarification for everyone, it's called a direct payment. This program it's not got all the requirements of a typical grant. So
Okay.
if we could refer to that as a direct payment, that will be a little less confusing for those people that are working through the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant process, because this one is more simplified because it's not under the grant guidelines, the way the legislation was written.
Direct payment. Good. I can do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Any more questions? Looks like we have answered 57 questions already. Does anybody else have anything else for us today? And I'm sure more information will be coming out in the next few days. We're having another training tomorrow with SBA as well, and we might get additional information. We will share that with you next Wednesday briefly for our updates. We have brief updates for all the different disaster loans out there, grants, direct funds to small businesses, and we will provide it to you then, and then also again the following Wednesday. But if you have any questions, please ask them now so that way. And if we aren't unable to answer your questions today, we are taking them away and submitting it to SBA so hopefully we can get an answer within the next few days or week or so.
And I have bravely put my email address on the slide, so feel free to email me. It's the easiest way.
Thank you, Steve. You are very welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate it. We get great turnouts on these Wednesdays, and we thank you all for joining us week after week, and also for our new people that join us as well, and our advisors that join us and ask great questions, because you know, no one, there are no cookie cutter businesses out there, as we know. So thank you for those great questions. It does really make us think. So thank you, Shannon and Laura. Jermaine, still have questions about multiple locations, but I will ask Louise. Okay, Jermaine. Yeah, you probably need to have a conversation so that way we can get our minds wrapped around it and see exactly what it is that you're saying. So we're answering the question correctly for you. And if we can't answer it, like I said, we'll, you know, get the question down and see if we can kick it up and see if somebody else can answer that for us. That may possibly help create this. Any more questions before we go today? Let's see, Rob, will this deck be available or will we send it via email? I believe you will, Bree is going to send it to you once you complete the survey. Is that correct, Bree?
Yes, it'll be sent out following the presentation along with the recording.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, anything else before we go? We'll cut it short today and give you guys back your, you know, we'll give you 15 more minutes for lunch today. You're welcome, Rob. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you so much to Steve Roth, Bree, Heather Lutzy, Carrie Ellenwood, Louise Dawson, and also Nicole for being here today and helping us get through all of these questions and through this deck. Let me see, there's 2 more questions that popped up. You are very welcome, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Okay, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.